Hello, and welcome to the Peace Church Fiscal Year 2020-2021 Budget Review presentation. I'm Rick Chapman, your church treasurer. In this presentation, we'll take a look at our current financial status, what your giving has allowed us to accomplish this year, and the upcoming fiscal year's new budget. The fiscal year, or financial accounting year, starts in July and ends 12 months later at the end of June. I'll be going through these slides fairly quickly, so if you want to spend more time on one, simply pause the presentation at that point and resume it when you're ready. So to start off, let's take a look at how we're doing financially at this time. As we all know, we've experienced two major hardships this year, the loss of our senior pastor and the COVID-19 pandemic. Both events resulted in reduced giving to the church, which is not surprising. Mid-year, we reduced our budget to ensure we didn't spend more than we received. The numbers were looking about right, and then the coronavirus hit, and giving dropped even lower. As a result, it looks like the current level of giving will not quite meet the reduced budget. However, the good news is that we've been able to reduce our expenses enough that we are not spending more than we're receiving. Here's a quick look back at the last 15 years' worth of giving history. As you can see, the current year is lower than the last couple of years. This may all sound a little bit gloomy, but we know that God is in control, and we trust that He will provide for His church, just as He's done in the past. And while giving may be down this year, we are doing okay financially, as you can see on the next slide. Here's a look at our current bank account balances. We have 3 bank accounts. Home Trust is where we have funds invested in a CD. First Citizens and Wells Fargo are regular bank accounts. Restricted accounts are for designated funds, or funds that carry over from year to year. Examples of that are some contributions designated for a missions trip and funds we have in our building reserves. We're thankful that our church leaders in the past saw the wisdom in setting aside surplus funds for possible future lean years. We have 2 goals along those lines. The first is to ensure that if some major event caused the church to close its doors and giving to stop, we would have enough funds to cover 3 to 6 months of our yearly operating budget. The second is to maintain a building reserves fund equal to 10 to 20% of the annual budget to ensure monies are available if one or more major unbudgeted building repairs are needed in a given year. You may wonder how our budget compares with other churches' budgets. Here you can see results of a survey that was taken by over 1,000 churches last year with data from Peace Church added in. As you can see, we compare favorably with other churches our size and larger. The 2 items that stand out the most are that we have no debt and that we give generously to foreign missions. We are very blessed to have been able to pay off our mortgage a few years ago. So, what did your giving allow us to do this year? Well, in addition to paying the salaries of our pastors and staff and running excellent youth and children's programs, to name just 2 ministries of the church, your giving allowed us to provide benevolent support to many families, to support various local and world missions, people, and organizations, to add live streaming capability when we needed it, and a number of building and grounds projects. Here are several other miscellaneous financial items that may be of interest to you. Every 3 to 5 years, we hire a CPA to perform a full financial audit of the church. That was done this year, and the results were good. There was a minor complaint about how we stated the value of our church assets based on the insured value rather than an appraised value, and we've corrected that. Otherwise, the review of our financial accounting practices was excellent. The bottom line is that your giving is being handled properly, and the church is being a good steward of those funds. You may have heard that the federal government established the Paycheck Protection Program. Small businesses and churches could apply for a loan to cover their payroll and a few other expenses during the COVID-19 crisis, and it would be forgiven as long as all employees remained on the payroll for a certain period of time. We considered taking advantage of that, as many other churches did, but ultimately decided not to, since we were able to keep up with our payroll and felt there were others who needed it more than we did. I'm happy to report that law enforcement officials have apprehended criminals involved in stealing checks from area church mailboxes, including ours. We've recovered most of the funds we lost, and we expect the remaining amount to be covered by our insurance. A while back, we enabled online giving to the church, and I'm sure it comes as no surprise to you that many of us have taken advantage of that since we ceased meeting for worship at the church building. So, on to the coming year's budget. Guess how many people are involved in creating the budget? Go ahead, take a guess. Well, the answer is that about 50 people were involved in planning, budgeting, accounting, reporting, and approving the new budget. Yes, that's a lot of people. Ministry leaders provided their request for funds needed to support the various ministries of the church. The church ministry staff provided their budget requests as well. The financial staff gathered all the requests into an initial budget, and the Finance Committee worked on financial projections and recommended a budget total amount to session. The session in Diaconate discussed the budget total, and session approved the final number. Temporary committees were established to recommend insurance plans and work on fitting the budget requests into the final approved budget total dollar amount. What I just described summarizes the official budget formation process. And here's what that looks like in graphical form. You can see the timeline of what happens step by step from start to finish. So, if your head isn't spinning from all the numbers and names and process descriptions, stay with me as we turn the page and take a look at the upcoming new budget. The budget is broken down into 4 major categories. The first 2, which you see here, are the administrative and personnel portions. On the administrative side, the building and grounds line item was increased since we're working to grow the building reserves after significant reductions in the past. You may recall that our target is to have an amount equal to 10 to 20% of the annual operating budget on hand in this fund. The office line item was reduced because we don't need to budget for an audit this year since we just had one. And our personnel budget has a mix of increases and reductions, mostly due to having no lead pastor now, but planning for that this coming year. The next 2 major categories of the budget are evangelism outreach missions and worship education. Under evangelism outreach missions, you can see that local and world missions both increased slightly. This is due to some new support they are planning to provide. Under Deacon Mercy, a portion of the benevolent support we provide to the Wesleyan Church in South Raleigh was moved from the Deacon Fund to the Benevolence Fund. The total amount of support remains unchanged. Under worship education, the worship item was reduced due to less of a need for guest preachers with the anticipation of having a new lead pastor this coming year. The adult ministry was increased to cover plans for a new enfolding ministry and WIC outreach. As you can see, overall, the new budget is 3.5% higher than this year's reduced budget, which is about 5.5% lower than this year's original budget. Here's a graphical view of the full budget broken down by its 18 accounting categories. There's a lot of detail on this slide. You may want to pause the presentation here to study it further. Note, we do not have a budgeted line item for benevolences. Instead, loose cash from Sunday offering collections and monies designated specifically for benevolences go into the restricted benevolence account. If it was in the budget, it would show up here as a 3.6% section. And here's a look at the budget broken down by ministry area categories. In this chart, all budget line items associated with the given ministry area are incorporated into each section. For example, the Children and Youth Ministry section includes those ministry program budgets and also the personnel expenses for the Children's and Youth Ministry staff. Likewise, pastoral staff personnel expenses are included in the worship section. Well, that's the end of our presentation, and even though we were unable to get together to meet as a congregation to go over it, we still want to hear from you and answer any questions you may have. So please feel free to send your questions to the email address you see here, and I or someone else on the Finance Committee will reply.